During John Wooden's 27 years at UCLA, he coached the Bruins to 4 undefeated seasons and a record 10 national titles. He was the first person inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame, both as a player and as a coach. What made him so successful? And what kind of coach never talked to his teams about winning? Coach Wooden believed that character and teamwork were far more significant than victory. His behavior demonstrated that his faith, family, and friends were the most important things to him. Toward the end of his life, John Wooden said, "If I were ever prosecuted for my religion, I truly hope there would be enough evidence to convict me." He was a legendary coach, a man who loved God, loved people, and loved to teach others. Join us for John Wooden, They Called Him Coach, on this Day of Discovery.
He talks a lot about his background, the influence of his father and his mother, where he came from in Indiana. And I think that your character, a lot of times your basic philosophy of life is formed sometimes fairly early on. He was a person of faith, obviously, and that didn't leave him. But I think his family background obviously had a lot to do with the kind of person that he was.
I grew up at Strenght, about 8 miles north of Martinsville, and we lived on a farm there. But I think the person probably had most influence on me throughout were my mother and father. In particular, my father. He said, "There's always time for play. That's after the chores and the studies are done, of course." He read to us every night. We didn't have electricity or running water or anything on the farm. And he would read poetry and scriptures to us every night. I had 3 brothers. I had 2 sisters. I never really got to know them. They died early. Just being born in Indiana in those years, and any young fellow is going to be interested in basketball. It's just the natural thing. Dad tacked up an old tomato basket, and Mother took an old cotton sock and filled it with rags, make it as round as you possibly could, and that's where I first started. I went to grade school there at Centerton. We had a grade school team that we played other teams, Hazelwood, Monrovia, and some of the others. Earl Warner, the principal and the coach in the grade school, I learned a lot from him too.
My father, I think, is a man for whom the word gentleman was coined, because he truly was a gentleman. Something that he gave me when I graduated from a small country grade school at Centerton. And we didn't have much in the material way, but he gave me a card. It was a little card that had a creed of 7 points. The first one was, "Be true to yourself." The next point was, "Make each day your masterpiece." The third one was, "Help others." The fourth one was, "Make friendship a fine art." Another one was, "Build a shelter against a rainy day." Another one was, "Drink deeply from good books." Most important, the good book. And then the last point in this creed was, "Every day and every evening, pray for guidance and give thanks for your blessings."
My first year in high school, commuted on the interurban that ran from Indianapolis to Martinsville. And then we lost the farm after my freshman year, and we moved into Martinsville.
In 1887, they drilled for oil in Martinsville, but instead hit mineral water. It smelled bad and tasted worse, but it was believed to have curative power. Sanitariums were built, and people came to soak in the baths, drink the water, and seek renewed health.
I met the The young lady, the only girl with whom I ever went with.
My dad was very, very shy, worked on the farm. My mother was a city girl from Martinsville. She came out with some friends that had a car, and he was working in the field, and he wouldn't come over to the car. They kept motioning him over, and he was plowing, and he said he was dirty and sweaty and his overalls. And then when school started again, my mother made a beeline for him and said, why didn't you come over? And he said, I wasn't cleaned up and I was ashamed. And she said, John Bob, is what she called him until they were in their 30s. I would never be ashamed of you. And he knew right then that was for him.
Both the Wooden and the Riley families attended the First Christian Church. There were endless small-town opportunities for young people to be together. Soon, John and Nellie became inseparable, and everyone seemed to know that they belonged to each other. Wise King Solomon said, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to uproot. But when winter comes to Indiana, there's another season." In 1924, Martinsville built Indiana's largest high school gymnasium. It seated nearly 5,000, more than the population of the town. During basketball season, Coach Glenn Curtis established a policy of no dating and home by 8 p.m. for his players. He agreed with King Solomon that there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain. Nellie countered by joining the pep band. Before every game, John winked at Nellie in the band. She gave him an okay sign, and he waved back at her. It was the beginning of a pregame ritual that would last for half a century. At school, Nellie was into everything. She loved music and thrived on dramatics, always landing a part in the school plays. Along with her best friend, Mary Snyder, Nell filled every day to the brim. John, on the other hand, quietly focused on his studies and on basketball.
My sophomore year, we lost the championship game in the state tournament to Marion with Stretch Murphy, who was the best player in the country, in my opinion. My junior year in high school, we won the state championship. We beat Muncie Central in the championship game. And my senior year, we lost the championship game to the same team we'd beaten for the championship the year before. I shot the technical foul and I missed it. And I was a good free throw shooter and hardly ever missed one. I missed it.
At the age of 17, Johnny Wooden began to ponder the meaning of success. Was it only winning or something more? Whatever it was, he was sure that for him, success would include Nellie Riley. When he left to attend Purdue University, she had one more year of high school and promised to wait for him. John's 4 years at Purdue were a whirlwind of basketball, classes, and work. With no athletic scholarship, he, like many other students, worked his way through school. In his fraternity, he waited tables to earn his meals. By maintaining his place on the academic honor roll, he received a tuition reduction. In basketball coach Ward Piggy Lambert, he found a highly principled man who emphasized conditioning, quickness, and team play.
Well, anything, I think you have to work at it, but you have to have some natural talent to begin with. But you have to have to work at it to bring it forth. I think the Lord gave me quickness, and that was my biggest asset I had. And other things that the Lord didn't give you just have to work on.
While John was away at college, Nellie lived with her parents in Martinsville.
While she was waiting for my dad to graduate from Purdue, she worked for the telephone company. She was involved, and she loved to dance, and she would have a few little dates, but they were just friends from high school and everything. Daddy was not happy about that, because that's another thing. He was a little bit jealous.
Nellie, much to my displeasure and all that, she dated a lot. She loved to dance and things like that, and I'm away at Purdue, and she worked. And I didn't like that, but somehow we both knew. I have a picture of Dr. Elliott giving me the Big Ten Academic Award when I graduated, and I cherish that.
After his senior season, John played a few professional games, but was hesitant about their lucrative offers to play full-time. He sought advice from his coach at Purdue.
But I went to talk to Lambert, and he said, "What'd you come to Purdue for?" Well, I said, "You got an education." I think so. You think you got it? Well, I said, "Well, I hope so." He said, "Well, I wouldn't throw it away." He said, "Johnny, you can't play in dirt without getting dirty. Well, you make up your mind what you do." He told me without telling me.
2 days before John and Nellie's wedding, a bank failure claimed John's life savings of $909.25. Mary Schneider's father loaned them $200, and with that, they pressed ahead.
Nellie and I were married in Indianapolis on August 8, 1932, and my brother and his girlfriend, who had a car, drove us up, and then they left. We ate at the Bamboo Inn, which was on the Circle at that time, and after that we went right next door and saw the Mills brothers make their very first appearance in Indianapolis.
My mother was very outgoing. My dad was very, very shy, and she encouraged him in high school to take a public speaking course because he just kind of always had his head down, and I think she was very instrumental in getting him to become less shy with people. They were totally opposites, so I think that's always a big attraction. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but in this case it worked beautifully.
A few weeks after their wedding, Nellie and John arrived in Dayton, Kentucky, just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati, where he had taken a job as a high school English teacher and coach.
Well, in 1932, the population was around 9,000 people, and it was a very thriving community. A lot of activity, typical river town. School teachers were very well thought of, they were sort of put on a little pedestal of their own as far as we were concerned. And Dayton always was very active in the sports field. In 1920, they nicknamed the team the Green Devils, and it stuck. And that's why it's called the Green Devils today.
John's duties included athletic director and head coach for 3 sports, including football, which he had never played. When one surly player challenged Coach Wooden's authority, a brief physical altercation followed, of which John was immediately ashamed.
He had a temper. Now, my mother was Irish, and she was very fiery, and she spoke her mind, but I don't think she really had the temper that Daddy did.
It was his first year out of college and his first year of coaching, and so he had a few things to learn, I guess.
John rehired the former football coach and turned his attention to teaching and coaching basketball.
John always said his first year in Dayton, Kentucky was probably his worst year in his entire coaching career because he lost almost every game. But he must have learned something because the second year he won almost every game in 1934. I know he had a great impact upon the players themselves because Ben Stahl, the only known living player that I'm aware of, often said that he was a very strict disciplinarian of his teams, and they had a lot of respect for him. He told you what he wanted, and he expected you to do it.
The school year was filled with teaching, coaching, and professional games John often played on weekends. Into this whirlwind of activity, Nancy Ann Wooden arrived in March of 1934. A month later, Nell wrote to her friend Mary Snyder, describing the thrill of buying new clothes for her non-pregnant body. She added, "I left the baby with John Bob. and he took splendid care of her. After 2 years in Dayton, John, Nellie, and Nancy Ann moved to a new opportunity in South Bend, Indiana.
I don't think South Bend knew whether I'd be a good English teacher or not. They hoped from my background I could maybe be a pretty good basketball and baseball coach. I wanted to be the best English teacher.
He was the athletic director, and he coached basketball and baseball, and then he was an English teacher. And he was a very good English teacher, and he's a good poet. If you've ever noticed his penmanship, it's beautiful. And he was very well read. I thought I was talking to Abraham Lincoln when I was talking to Wooden.
I ran across a couple of things that made an impression on me. One of them is no written word, no oral plea can teach our youth what they should be, nor all the books on all the shelves. It's what the teachers are themselves. That made an impression on me.
We used to scrimmage together, and he was a heck of a ball player. I used to have to guard him and shoot, he'd knock me down, but it was respect.
I saw a man who knew the game of basketball, and everything depended on quickness.
He wanted you to perform to the best of your ability. And he really could not accept anything less than that.
You know, there's a big difference between, why did you do it that way, rather than, let me show you how to do it. Coach Wooden could show you how to do it.
I was about 5'8" and the smallest individual on the Central High School basketball team. He gave me confidence by saying to me, you come out to practice tonight. So that's what I did. I started practicing.
We traveled with the team by car to away games, and when my brother Jim was born, he was with us as well. And it was just, that was our life. We didn't know anything else, and it was great.
I'd always try to get in the back seat of Mr. Wooden's car, because Mrs. Wooden would be on the trip and she'd sit next to him. And that's why I always liked to ride with him, because you could see the love, and it helped me.
She was the nicest thing that happened to him.
Oh, Nellie? She was always there.
She was at all the games, and she was involved, she was interested, and she loved the kids that were playing.
Well, our regular schedule was on Sundays, when we went to church, went to Sunday school, church.
John faithfully attended a weekly men's class taught by the pastor, Reverend Frank Davison, a man he greatly admired.
Faith was so important to him. You knew that they were church-going people.
He didn't have to say, do you go to church often or anything. You knew what he was doing, and you tried to emulate him.
He believed in religion without preaching it. He would rather live it than talk about it.
We did not win any state championships. We did get to the semi-state, and so that was about as close as we got.
Many times I would hear him say, we lost, but I'm so proud of you. It was more how we played the game than the outcome of the game.
He expressed that to us, that we should do what we can to do our best at any time and every time.
I'm sure that Wooden would have thought that not only our team, but all of the teams that he has coached through the years were successful.
The Woodens were content with their life in South Bend. John enjoyed teaching, coaching, and playing occasional professional games on the weekends. But when the war began in 1941, everything changed.
I enlisted, and probably the major disagreement that my dear wife and I had in all our years was that she didn't think I should have.
She was upset because Daddy enlisted without, and they always talked everything over, but in this particular thing, at this particular time, he just wanted to do that. He said so his son would never have to. And I can remember being very frightened about it. We kind of have bad dreams about it.
In early 1943, John was called to active duty, where he served as a fitness officer, responsible for the physical conditioning of sailors and airmen. When an emergency appendectomy canceled John's orders to the aircraft carrier USS Franklin, Fred Stalcup, a fellow athlete and fraternity brother from Purdue, took his place. On March 19, 1945, a Japanese dive bomber scored a direct hit on the Franklin. The explosion and fire turned the aircraft carrier into a raging inferno. Fred Stalcup was among the 800 crew members who died in the attack.
But we were always, we were with him the whole time, except when he went for officers training, then we traveled with him. And then at the end of his career, he was on an aircraft carrier in Chicago, but we were back in South Bend. And so we were very fortunate that we were able to be with him.
John went back to his old job at Central High School early in 1946, but the city of South Bend felt strange. The school had changed, and perhaps he himself was no longer the same. He began looking for a new job and a different school. When his former high school coach, Glenn Curtis, recommended him for the head coaching position at Indiana State Teachers College, John and Nell decided to give it a try. After 11 years as a high school coach, John Wooden was eager to meet the challenge of college basketball. He and the family moved to Terre Haute during the summer of 1946. And he took something into this new job that he would carry for the rest of his life. Just before John entered the Navy, his pastor in South Bend, the Reverend Frank Davison, had given him a small cross as a farewell gift. Coach Wooden later received a poem which he said best described his lifelong association with the little cross. I carry a cross in my pocket, a simple reminder to me of the fact that I am a Christian, no matter where I may be. This little cross is not magic, nor is it a good luck charm. It isn't meant to protect me from every physical harm. It's not for identification, for all the world to see. It's simply an understanding between my Savior and me. When I put my hand in my pocket to bring out a coin or a key, the cross is there to remind me of the price He paid for me. It reminds me, too, to be thankful for my blessings day by day, and to strive to serve Him better in all that I do and say. It's also a daily reminder of the peace and comfort I share with all who know my Master and give themselves to His care. So I carry a cross in my pocket, reminding no one but me that Jesus Christ is the Lord of my life, if only I'll let Him be. Following a stellar career as a player and a high school coach, John Wooden arrived at Indiana State Teachers College in July 1946. In the aftermath of World War II, many young men just out of military service were on their way to college.
When I returned from service, enrolled at Indiana State, a school of about maybe 1,800, it was a time of, I think, pretty great optimism in the country.
When Coach Wooden held basketball tryouts in October, the gymnasium overflowed with candidates.
I suppose half of them were returning veterans from various services, and the other half might have been new freshmen, and then the entire team from the year before.
And then there are people from South Bend Central that played for him in South Bend.
He called me and asked me if I'd be interested in going to Indiana State, and I said, oh, sure, and he invited about 10 or 12 South Bend people.
I was even out for the team, and he said, I've got enough players, I need an assistant. I became an assistant.
He made probably some enemies at Terre Haute because he cut many of the seniors that were on the last squad, and the people didn't like it.
Coach Wooden knew what he wanted. He wanted a fast, quick, agile group of players, regardless of their size or anything else, and that's what he went for.
The team's record during that first season brought an invitation to the NAIB tournament in Kansas City, but Coach Wooden said his team would not play.
The athletic department said we had missed too many classes, so we weren't going to go to a tournament.
But it wasn't that. It was that the situation with Clarence Walker.
My father's name was Clarence Jordan Walker, and his connection with John Wooden was he was a basketball player at Indiana State. Through the years of growing up, my father really never talked much about his days in college. However, it's this one day I was a senior in high school and we lost our regional championship basketball game. I was a little distraught about it, of course, and my father came up to me. He said, I got something I want you to see. And it was more of a diary that he kept on himself and the Indiana State basketball team and everything that they went through, everywhere that they had to go, where he could play, where he couldn't play, even to the point to places that he could not even go. And I started asking him questions about it. He would just say, you know, this is how it was back then. Every day was a different day, and every day has its own trouble.
Now, it did come out later that we were invited if Coach would not bring Clarence Walker. And to his everlasting credit, he said, we won't go.
Well, John Wooden, from me reading that portion of the diary, told me about his character and his Christian discipleship, actually, where he would, if we don't take the whole, we're not going at all. And what I mean by the whole, his team, that was like his family, and not one was greater than the other.
When you became associated with Coach Wooden, why you were going to be one of his family.
He's one of my boys. So he would say, no, we're not coming. We didn't see color. None of Wooden's teams ever saw color.
We would stop at a restaurant along the way, and somebody would refuse to allow him to eat with us.
And the manager says, we don't feed people like this. So we all decided to leave. That's what we did. I just wondered how he took all this.
I think the only thing that really kept his mind straight was his family and his faith in God. He was a God-fearing man, taught us and instilled Christian discipleship and stewardship within us as a family. Probably the most significant was just his desire to show all men are created equal.
The next year, the league changed its policy, and Clarence Walker traveled with the team to Kansas City. There he became the first African American to play in a postseason National Collegiate Basketball Tournament.
She was a pretty lady, feisty.
I think she was a feisty little Irish girl.
Feisty is a good word for her.
Oh, she was a wonderful lady who knew every one of us and our girlfriends, and never missed a game, home or away.
Coach Wooden said that Nellie was the most important thing in his life, and he feels that he would not have been anything without Nellie.
I'm asked many times about my family and growing up, and I continue to think and feel and say that I wish everyone would be as fortunate as I was to grow up in a family where my mother and dad loved each other and loved my brother Jim and I.
For many years, John Wooden had been contemplating the nature of success. What was it, and how could it be achieved?
I wanted to come up with a different definition of success than Mr. Webster. I wanted to be more than just the material possessions or prestige. And my dad, I remembered he tried to teach us that never cease trying to do the best you can do at whatever it is. And I'd more or less forgotten that. Probably it went in one ear and out the other in that time. And then I read a short verse that said, "At God's footstool to confess, a poor soul knelt and bowed his head. I failed," he cried. "The Master said, thou didst thy best. That is success." From those, I coined my own definition of success in 1934. I choose to define it as peace of mind, attained only through self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to do the best of which you're capable. And you're the only one that knows that, you know. Nobody else knows. You can fool others, but you can't fool yourself. And it's like character and reputation. Your character, you're the only one that knows your character. Your reputation is what you're perceived to be by others, but your character is what you really are.
As a teaching tool, Coach Wooden developed a visual illustration called the Pyramid of Success. It was not just for his players, but a goal for him to pursue as well.
When we were leaving, the bus was parked right out in front of the arena. All the coaches were coming out, and someone must have said something that Coach Wooden didn't like. Coach Wooden turned around, took his coat off, and took about 5 steps toward that group. And then something stopped him, and he turned around and put his coat back on and got the bus. But it's the only time, really, I ever saw him come close.
In high school, we played against Mishawaka, and somebody from Mishawaka accused him of talking to the referees ahead of time. I saw him lose his temper, which you never see. So I realized you don't question his integrity.
But that was another side of Coach Wooden that I later learned as a player. He was a tough cookie and a fiery competitor, I guess is what you could call it.
A sports writer called Johnny Wooden's early coaching career the storm before the calm. He would always be a fierce competitor, but he was also growing toward greater understanding and self-control. Coach Wooden's record at Indiana State caught the attention of several large universities, including Minnesota and UCLA. John and Nellie's first choice was Minnesota, and he was ready to accept their promised offer. But their phone call was delayed by a snowstorm in Minneapolis, and that changed everything.
Somehow, because of a communication issue, their offer got to him late, and he'd already told the people at UCLA he would go, when he probably would have preferred to go to Minnesota because it was in the Midwest. And but he said, well, once he had given his word, that was it. So he went to UCLA, and you wonder in today's culture How many coaches would do that?
We knew that, that there was going to come that time.
We just knew that he was destined for great things.
And then all of a sudden, UCLA got a hold of him, and we couldn't do anything about it.
I think it was not surprising to any of us that he would accept the job at UCLA.
And then he talked to us all about it, and we were more happy for him than disappointed for ourselves.
In the summer of 1948, as the Wooden family headed west, the feeling of home disappeared behind them. Ahead in Los Angeles, the young coach from Indiana would find himself on a much larger stage than he could imagine. At UCLA, football was king. The campus gymnasium had poor ventilation and half the seating capacity of Johnny Wooden's Indiana High School. And the basketball team had a losing record. Undaunted, Coach Wooden hired his former assistant, Ed Powell, and went to work.
Coach Wooden I met at the tryouts in the fall of 1948, and we practiced in the old men's gym, the B.O. Barn they called it.
Oh yes, the B.O. Barn. That was a very appropriate nickname, and among others.
Indiana basketball, Kentucky basketball, that was a big deal. UCLA, the gym, we had to sort of share it with the gymnasts.
And going into that gym where the gymnastics team practiced and all the other teams practiced, and it was a terrible aroma. And the smog was visible in the room.
Gymnasts used the same gym floor. There was a lot of chalk from their hands if they're doing their aerial work. Well, we had to mop the floor first.
The principles Hugh Wooden gave his sons included 2 sets of 3s. The first, never lie, never cheat, never steal. The second, don't whine, don't complain, don't make excuses. Instead of looking at the problems, Johnny Wooden focused on his opportunity.
Wooden was a practice coach, and practices were tougher than a game, always. Practices were tougher. Intense physical conditioning. I mean, you always knew you were in better physical condition than your opponent. There's no question about it. Practices were, again, you never forget a Coach Wooden practice, ever.
Coach Wooden told the sports editor of the Los Angeles Daily News, quote, "No team is going to outrun or out-hustle the Bruins this season. You can put that down in black and white." Slated to finish last, UCLA captured the division championship in 1949. The freshman team under Coach Ed Powell lost only 1 game. Something new was happening at UCLA, and it was more than winning basketball games.
I don't think I've ever heard him or Ed Powell, his assistant, say anything about winning. I heard them more say, execute what you've been taught, and there's a good chance you'll win, but the winning was not the goal. The performing well, what you've been taught, that was the goal.
The Woodens attended the First Christian Church of Santa Monica, where John served as a deacon. Nancy and Jim loved California, but John and Nell missed Indiana, their families, and the slower pace of life in the Midwest. In time, however, their discontent began to fade.
We weren't happy out here at the time. It takes quite a while to get adjusted out here, but after you get adjusted, you don't want to leave.
Coach Wooden had never seen me play and had no interest in me at all. But my coach in junior college recommended me, and they had a roster spot open. They needed a body.
Came from a very small high school in southeastern Kentucky. He took me sight unseen. He never got to see me play.
Even though I grew up in a little city called El Segundo, not too far from here, my horizons weren't real broad, so I had never even seen UCLA play. I'd never heard about Coach Wooden. he was just another coach when I got here, and nice little guy, and ran a pretty tight ship, and I was happy to be here.
He really taught us the basics in every facet of the game. It started with putting on your socks.
Cotton on the inside, put that on first, smooth it out very carefully, make sure there's no bubbles in it, and then put on a heavy wool sock over it.
There was no room for them to get wrinkled underneath your feet so you get blisters, but also how to tie your shoe. His main concern with doing our shoes was to avoid blisters. And it's funny because I have a 12-year-old that I just had to, re-instruct for the 20th time on how to tie his shoe. Lace them up from the bottom up, make sure there's no slack. His shoes always come loose during the game. Dude, tie your shoes up. So he started just tying them haphazardly. I said, no. You got to start at the bottom, pull each shoestring up 2 at a time, tight, all the way to the top. And I thought about that. I didn't say it to him, but that's the way Coach Wooden taught us.
Coach Wooden did all of his work during the week. His canvas was teaching us during the week, and he loved that time of practice.
Practices under Coach Wooden were a combination of a couple of things. They were very intense and very focused and very competitive would be a good word to use, but they were also fun. He was a guy who always felt, I think, that we were inclined to coddle ourselves and make it easy on ourselves, and so he wanted to push us to excellence.
He prepared 2 hours every morning, or 2.5 hours, for our 2.5-hour practice every afternoon. He was totally prepared. He had these little 3x5 cards.
It was all written down on a 3x5 card. He kept in the pocket of his jacket, and he'd blow the whistle and send us into our first drills.
So it was like this. He'd blow that whistle and we needed to be there, and then he'd blow the whistle 5 minutes later and we needed to be there.
And it would just go from one drill to the next the whole time.
We did things like imaginary shooting drills where you'd have an imaginary basketball and you would shoot the ball, this imaginary ball, and work on your form, work on your follow through and your rotation, and you had to see the ball kind of going through the hoop. So the whistle would blow, we'd shoot. Whistle would blow, we'd shoot this imaginary ball. And Coach was, he was into it like it was a real ball. Just make sure you hold it here and make sure you get the rotation. You got to put your finger right on the hole here and go through the whole thing. But in my mind, I want to say, Coach, but there's no ball. I don't know there's no ball.
His concern was always to get the maximum out of what we had to work with. You can't put in what God left out, but you can seek to at least maximize what God put in.
And then when we got to the games, we would meet beforehand. He would tell us, just to do our best, play together, and then he would sit down on the bench and we would play.
Usually he had his program folded up in one hand, and I had his cross in his other hand. And I only found this out in later years, but our minister from the First Christian Church in South Bend gave it to Daddy when he went into the service. And it was very unusual. It had the Alpha and the Omega on it. And he had his little ritual before the games, of course. Kind of pull up his socks and pat his assistant and then turn around and look at Mother, and she'd give him the high sign. And from then on, it was up to his team.
In 1963, at the urging of his assistant coach, Jerry Norman, John Wooden made some changes that brought dramatic results.
We had a full court press, so as soon as the jump ball started the game, we were pressing and running the entire game.
We knew when we walked on the floor, we might lose the game, but we would never lose a game because we were tired.
And every game it turned out that we were in far better condition than our opponents.
In '64, we were not considered to be a serious threat even to win the conference.
Most people believed they were too short to win, but week after week, the Bruins proved everyone wrong. They advanced to the NCAA championship game without a single loss.
We were playing Duke, which was a considerably larger team physically than we were, and we were underdogs in the finals. After 29 straight wins, we were still underdogs. But we played a game, the same kind of game we played all year.
We wore them out in the middle of the game. We had a run, and that's what won our ball games for us. Coach Wooden always told us never get too high and never get too low. And after the championship, he was right there. The fact that we won the whole thing was, you know, that was a goal of his, and he was very happy to have that goal, but he was excited that we had done as well as we could. That's what he always preached and taught, you know, to be a team, to play together, and to be the best that you could be.
He said to us, "Gentlemen, you meet the same people on the way down that you meet on the way up. So behave yourselves." But he just always seemed to have an uncommon amount of wisdom, even when it came to being in a position he'd never been in before, like winning a national title.
It's nice to win, obviously, and nice to go undefeated, but it does have its pitfalls in that the more successful you are, the higher expectations get.
The next year, UCLA repeated as national champions. During the following decade, the Bruins dominated college basketball in America, and Johnny Wooden struggled, as never before, with the pressure of success.
People get used to winning, and they never get used to losing. So it's sort of an escalating level of expectation that paints you into a corner where the demands and the expectations continue to rise. Anything less than a national championship was probably not a very good year.
In December 1972, Coach Wooden suffered a mild heart attack. At the end of that season, UCLA won its 7th consecutive national title and was riding a 75-game winning streak. But in a letter to Dwayne Clee, Coach described it as a very trying year. The players were fine, he said, but some of the press and the fans were almost unbearable at times. May our Lord be with you. Sincerely, Coach Wooden. In January 1974, a one-point loss ended UCLA's 88-game winning streak. At the NCAA semifinals, North Carolina State defeated the Bruins 80-77 in double overtime.
You're never going to be able to win enough to satisfy people, but you could satisfy yourself and your team by trying to be the very best that you could be. Doesn't mean that when people say mean things about you, or if they aren't disappointed in how your team plays, it doesn't hurt. You certainly feel that, but you also realize that underneath it all, there's some things that are more important.
Coach Wooden often quoted a favorite poem that helped carry him through the ups and downs of his remarkable career. It was the bedrock upon which he stood in the shifting sands of public acclaim.
I first heard this at an FCA conference in Estes Park, Colorado, in the early years of the FCA. This crowd on earth, they soon forget the heroes of the past. They cheer like mad until you fall, and that's how long you last. But God, He never does forget, and in His Hall of Fame, by just believing in His Son, inscribed, you'll find your name. I tell you, friends, I would not trade my name, however small, inscribed up there beyond the stars in that celestial hall, for any famous name on earth or glory that they share. I'd rather be an unknown here and have my name up there. Wouldn't we all?
From his roots on a farm to the high-pressure pinnacle of coaching success, John Wooden tried to follow the advice and example of his father.
When I graduated from a small country grade school in southern Indiana, he gave me a little card. One side it said 4 things a man must learn to do if he would make his life more true: to think without confusion clearly, to love his fellow man sincerely, to act from honest motives purely, to trust in God and heaven securely.
While many people held Coach Wooden in high esteem, not everyone thought he was wonderful. Sports writers and opposing coaches could be quite cutting in their remarks.
If you're in this type of profession, when you're in the public eye, you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have praise, you're going to have criticism. Some of it's going to be deserved and some of it isn't.
At the other extreme, some people called him St. John and believed he could do no wrong.
But your strength, I don't care whether you're a teacher, a surgeon, or whatever you are, your strength depends on how you react to both praise and criticism. You can't let either one affect you.
And through all the peaks and valleys of his career, Coach Wooden's biggest fan was always there.
She was a consummate wife and mother, and that was her career, and she was very, very, very good at it. And she picked out Daddy's, all of his clothes, and right from his socks all the way up, and his ties and his shirts. And they were playing a team that one of the coaches was dressed very, very flamboyantly. And it was written up in the paper the next day that they described this coach and his plaid sport coat and this. And then there was Coach Wooden looking like an undertaker. Well, my mother really took issue with that. And I think the next week she had him out shopping for some new clothes.
She was very bubbly and outgoing, and always had a smile for everybody, always had something to say to encourage you.
She was a pistol, Nell Wooden. She was a pistol. He was very calm and reserved, and she was a spitfire.
I can remember her in the stands, and maybe a referee would make a call she didn't agree with, and she would let the referee have it, and we would kind of joke on the bench. It's like, Nell's a little feisty. She's a feisty one right there. But so you could tell that during the course of their multitude of years together, that she was all in. You know, she was all in with Coach all the way, and that was a fun thing to kind of be a part of.
With each passing year, retirement grew larger on the horizon. During the 1973 season, Nell wrote to her best friend Mary saying, "We will hang up the basketball shoes at the end of next year. Goody." A year later, Nell wrote, "I think John will get out of coaching next year probably. If not then, for sure the next year." But no one knew when it would happen, not even Coach Wooden himself, until one Saturday night in San Diego. When the game ended, instead of going to meet the press as he usually did, John Wooden made his way to the UCLA locker room.
Coach Wooden comes in and just kind of tells us to, pipe down, quiet, quiet, quiet. I got something to say to you guys. And so he came in and talked about how he was happy with the job that we had done, and we had played a great game, and that he had been thinking about this a long time, and had come to the conclusion that the next game, that Monday night, the championship game, would be his last game, and that he was going to retire and get out of coaching. Everybody felt like they had been kind of punched in the chest. He told us that and walked out, and Andre McCarter, who was the captain of that team, was kind of our spiritual compass in terms of how he looked at things, and he pulled us all together, and it's like, guys, look, there's no way that we're going to let Coach Wooden not go out a national champion. There's just no way that's going to happen. And we all kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, you're right. There's no way we're going to let that happen.
On Coach Wooden's 65th birthday, friends, fans, and celebrities gathered to celebrate his career and say goodbye. After nearly 40 years in coaching, it was time for John and Nell to begin a new chapter together. In retirement, John and Nell were far from idle. Each summer, they continued their long tradition of holding several one-week basketball camps for young players. Nell wrote to Mary, "So you see, he isn't retired. I say he's rewired." His coaching clinics and speaking engagements took them all over the world. Many times, Coach Wooden's theme was the pyramid of success. The foundation is anchored by the cornerstones of industriousness and enthusiasm. In between, the working together blocks of friendship, loyalty, and cooperation.
We read that pyramid of success thing until the printing faded, you know, and we got it every year when we met to begin the season. And you know, he made those things the cornerstone of his whole approach to coaching.
The second tier contains the essential qualities of self-control, alertness, initiative, and intentness.
I thought all he was teaching was how to get the ball in the basket, how to win the game, and then that was the end of it, as far as I was concerned.
Coach Wooden called his middle row the character blocks: condition, skill, and team spirit.
What he was actually doing was he was building principles into us young men for later on in life. And the more we listened at that point, the better off we would have been.
Well, you know, as a 17-year-old freshman, I was pretty narrow-minded in terms of my focus. I wanted to win a championship, and I wanted to play a lot of minutes, to get in on the court and be a part of the winning and the atmosphere.
Poise, confidence, and competitive greatness complete Coach Wooden's pyramid of success. Converging at the apex are patience and faith.
And I'd like to say that at the time I was a Bruin from 73 to 75 when I played for Coach Wooden, that, you know, I got a handle on all the life lessons and embraced the pyramid wholeheartedly, but I didn't. I mean, I was young, and the beach and the girls and the whole situation and the atmosphere on campus was it was a real thriving type of an atmosphere. It was right at the height of the civil rights movement, you know, the whole idea of black pride and afros and all that. So, I mean, you know, to have this Midwestern white man, you know, telling me anything about living life at that point, I wasn't really that open to. I'd never say that to him. No, that's kind of, you know, but I'm just reflecting back on that time. You know, I had so much respect for him, mainly because of how he lived his life and the fact that he never cursed.
Coach Wooden didn't swear. Never a swear word out of his mouth.
People have always commented on the fact that they didn't hear him use profanity, and he'd never used profanity with us.
Never lost his temper, never swore.
He never used profanity.
Never heard him swear a word.
However, his not using profanity didn't keep him from setting the record straight when he wanted to with individuals and with us as a team.
During practice, if we messed up and he said, "Goodness gracious sakes alive," then we were really in trouble.
Goodness gracious sakes alive, Jimmy.
Goodness gracious sakes alive, and get mad at certain players, but when you knew when he did that you were doing something that you should have been doing.
He wasn't beyond telling an official what he thought of him as far as the various calls he was making, but he could use those same goodness gracious and sakes alive and what are you doing out there? Why don't you call him at this end like that end, and so forth. He got a lot of mileage out of the goodness
gracious
sakes alive.
In retirement, Nellie and John cherished every minute together. Some people wondered if they ever argued about anything.
Yes, my mother thought that you could write a check and you didn't have to enter it in the checkbook. You know, the old saying, well, gosh, I thought we had money, there were still checks. So that's the only thing I can really remember them talking about.
Don't take friendship for granted. It's like marriage. If you take it for granted, it won't last. You must work at it. And you mustn't just work at it from one side. Both sides must work at it.
They had some good years together, and at least the pressure of the coaching was off. And he enjoyed doing his basketball camps, and Mother was always with him for that. And so they had some good quality time together. She needed to have a hip replacement, but they kind of put it off because she had emphysema, and so that was going to be very tricky. And they put it off as long as they could. Right after their 50th wedding anniversary, they finally decided that they would do it. And then she had a lot of problems after that. Her heart stopped. She was in a coma for about 3 months.
Every day, John sat beside Nell's hospital bed, held her hand, and talked to her about their life together, where they had been, what they had done, and how much he loved her. When she squeezed his hand one day and later opened her eyes, John considered it a miracle. A few days later, after 90 days in a coma, she was back home. But a year and a half later, on Christmas morning, Nell was rushed to the hospital where she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
And she passed away on my birthday. So that's kind of been a poignant time. And then it was difficult for my dad after she passed away.
He had a very difficult time with it. He just became a recluse for a while. He was having a real tough time.
I think it affected him very profoundly. And we were out there, in fact, not long after she had died. After we had gone out to dinner together, he invited us back to his condo, and the desk calendar was still open to the day of her death.
She was his whole life, you know. They're retired and spending time together, and they were going to do things, and 10 years after he retired, then she passed away.
He still talked about her a lot and was, about how much he missed her, and he didn't change a lot of things in his living quarters just because he wanted to keep them the way they were when she was there.
It was very devastating to him, real tough.
That was something that he, with his great self-discipline and self-control and all the rest, couldn't really deal with. You can't fix that.
We were very concerned about him because he missed her terribly. I know our family doctor said he just pines for her every single day.
And it was an occasion that I think caused him maybe to lean on God in a way that he'd never done before.
When Mother passed away, the fact that his first great-grandchild was on the way, and he really looked forward to that, and that it was a big, big help to him.
And the birth of his great-grandchild is what kind of pulled him out of that.
With a will to carry on, even without my mother, though he missed her every day, and pined for her, and looked forward to the time when he would be with her.
Every year brought new honors and awards to Coach Wooden. He received each one graciously, while always keeping in mind a favorite saying: talent is God-given, be humble. Fame is man-given, be thankful. Conceit is self-given, be careful.
I was a ballet dancer, and I came in just to be the dance coach. They offered me a full scholarship back in the 80s to be the dance coach, and a few years after that they offered me the head coaching job. I took the job, and I tried to do what I thought was best, and we did horribly. I took a program that was in the top 5 in the country, and my first year as the head coach, we finished last at the national championships. So I was ready to retire, and I was walking through our student store, and I saw a little blue book that was written by this coach whose name is on the building that we train in, and he's got this little pyramid thing that's all over our campus. But I opened this little blue book, and I read his definition of success. And that definition of success hit straight to my heart as a dancer. Success is peace of mind, which is the direct result of knowing that you've done everything you can to become the best that you're capable of becoming. So I was like, oh, I need to meet this man. And I knew my husband, who had coached football here for 24 years, knew Coach Wooden. So I started in, nagging, Bobby, we need to have Coach Wooden over for dinner.
Come on, Valerie. I said, can you imagine how many people call him and want him to do things all the time? I'm sure he just wants some downtime. I really don't feel good about calling him.
Bobby, he can say no. And after 2 weeks, I wore him down. We invited Coach Wooden over for dinner. He said, I would love to come over to your house for dinner. And he came over. We spent an amazing evening.
Not only did he have great wisdom, but he was incredibly funny. Had a great wit about him. He loved to jab back and forth and see if you could take it and what you could give back.
That set up a relationship that lasted 14 years.
And there were times I'd be traveling with our football team and she'd go over and spend the day with him, and they'd watch the football game together. So they spent a lot of time together.
I went over and took my knitting and I sat on the couch and I was knitting and he was sitting in his little chair, and at halftime he muted the TV and he said to me, you know, honey, Nellie and I made love every day. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm gonna get the sex talk from Coach Wooden now.
He said, I didn't say we had sex every day, I said we made love every day.
And he said, a day did not go by that we didn't tell each other how much we loved each other, that we didn't hug and kiss, that we didn't share our love for each other in a very personal and private way, just with a touch, or just by telling each other we loved each other. And don't let a day go by without ever telling Bobby how much you love him.
Whenever he saw his wife, gave her a hug and a kiss, and what we saw was he loved his wife and he loved his children. And that had nothing to do with basketball. That's what we saw.
And so, as a youngster, you're watching all that. And as a youngster, you're saying to yourself, man, I'd love to have a relationship like that, as committed and loving of a relationship as he and Nell had.
Well, she was a sweetheart. And he really loved her. That was easy to see, and his faithfulness across the years and his perpetuation of her memory in, for example, the basketball court at UCLA, which he insisted be named for her too. I thought, this is great. This is how it should be.
Coach Wooden always enjoyed returning to his hometown. It was often said that he never forgot his roots or his friends.
We do have a very special guest and a very famous person from Martinsville, Coach John Wooden, and a number of his families here with us. So we're just delighted that you can be back with us and a part of our service this morning. And now let us open our hearts and our minds to the wonderful God who gave us Christ, through whom we have life.
One of his strongest suits is that when people spoke to him, they had his undivided attention, and they knew it.
Each time Coach came to Martinsville, he visited the cemetery, not far from his childhood home on the farm.
Being back here in Indiana, I was reminded of my father, but he gave me a card. It was a little card that had a creed of 7 points. Be true to yourself. Make each day your masterpiece. Help others. Make friendship a fine art. Build a shelter against a rainy day. Drink deeply from good books. And pray for guidance and give thanks for your blessings.
Coach Wooden was a man of faith. He had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But it wasn't something that he talked about. He was not a preacher, but he lived his life to such an extent that it made you think, how did this guy get to be the man that he was? And that was definitely part of it.
When I went through some tough times, he was right there. I lost a son in a drowning accident. He helped me through that. There's a saying about, the way you live your life may be the only Bible that a lot of people see. And so he didn't have to quote scripture, but again, he did it more by example. He kind of led by example, and you knew that there was something that he had that was the glue that kind of kept everything together, that allowed him to maintain the perspective that he had.
True to himself, true to his God, true to his faith, unwavering faith. Coach's faith gave me that same freedom to understand you can be in this really hard winner-take-all world and have a very strong faith and stay true to that faith.
There was a pecking order at the counter, and everybody had their own seats. Everybody kept track of everybody else. If somebody wasn't there for 2 days, everybody's calling and worrying, and Daddy loved that.
And he was here every day. In fact, he usually sat in the booth behind us.
But the coach is very low-key and very humble. He never allowed me to reserve the table for him.
Once in a while when he'd come in by himself, he'd sit up here at the counter.
He'd have the same breakfast, and he'd have a lot of his ex-players would come and talk to him, and he had a very good sense of humor.
He was our celebrity, you know? But he's what a wonderful man. It was just great to talk with him once in a while.
And at the beginning, I thought he's only the basketball coach. Everything is about sport. But after I read his book, I said, wow, he's not only the basketball coach, he's the life coach. The way they treat people. Very friendly, equally with anybody. No matter he's a former player or just a kids, coach treat them equally.
I think the most important thing about John was his faith, because his philosophy, the way he did things, all stemmed from his faith.
Too bad there was only one John Wooden. There should be a town full of people like John Wooden.
The man everyone called Coach always considered himself a teacher, and throughout John Wooden's life, his message never changed.
Today is the only important day of your life. Yesterday's gone. It'll never change. Tomorrow can only be affected by what you do in preparation today, and failure to prepare is preparing to fail.
In Coach Wooden's autobiography, he said, quote, "I always tried to make it clear that basketball is not the ultimate. It is of small importance in comparison to the total life we live. There is only one kind of life that truly wins, and that is the one that places faith in the hands of the Savior. Until that is done, we are on an aimless course that runs in circles and goes nowhere."
My favorite poet is me. I'm a rhymer. I'll give you one that I wrote recently if you'd like to hear it. The years have left their imprint on my hands and on my face. Erect no longer is my walk, and slower is my pace. But there is no fear within my heart, because I'm growing old. I only wish I had more time to better serve my Lord. When I've gone to Him in prayer, He has brought me inner peace. And soon my cares and worries and other problems cease. He's helped me in so many ways. He's never let me down. Why should I fear the future when soon I could be near His crown? Though I know down here my time is short, there is endless time up there, and He will forgive and keep me ever in His loving care. I'm a rhymer. That's a rhyme, not poetry.